He grabbed her arm in front of 100 people, called her a thief. A liar. Someone who didn't belong. She looked up at him with those quiet, tired eyes and said nothing. What he didn't know would destroy him. The Kang Empire Gala was the kind of event where even the air felt expensive. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne towers. Women dripping in diamonds. And in the middle of all that gold and silk, a girl who didn't belong. Soo-Ah moved quietly through the crowd, tray in hand, keeping her head down the way poor people learn to do in rich rooms. She'd worked the catering shift for 8 hours. Her feet ached. Then she bumped into a woman in red, and a pearl necklace slid from the woman's neck to the floor. Before Soo-Ah could even reach down, a hand closed around her wrist.
Hard. Cold.
She looked up.
Dark eyes. Sharp jaw.
The most terrifying man she'd ever seen. "Caught you," he said. The room went silent. But Soo-Ah didn't pull away. She just looked at him and smiled sadly. Jae-Won Kang had no patience for thieves. He'd built his empire by removing threats, quietly, efficiently, without hesitation. He tightened his grip on the girl's wrist and turned to face the crowd. "Security," he said. One word. That's all it took. 2 men in black materialized instantly. He pushed the girl toward them. "Escort her out. Ban her from every Kang property." The woman in red, his associate's wife, pressed her fingers to her mouth in dramatic distress. The pearls were hers. This girl had taken them.
Simple.
The girl in the worn cardigan looked around the room. 100 faces, all staring. She took a slow breath.
Still didn't speak.
Still didn't defend herself. That silence bothered Jae-Won more than he expected. AS security pulled her toward the door. Something small fell from her pocket onto the polished floor. Nobody picked it up. The crowd drifted back to their champagne and conversation. The gala hummed on. But Jae-Won's eyes stayed on that small object on the floor. Later, when the room had thinned, he walked over slowly. Crouched down. It was a hospital bracelet. Pale blue plastic, frayed at the edge. He turned it over.
A name.
A room number. Pediatric ward, 4B. A child. He stood up slowly. Something cold moved through his chest that wasn't anger. His assistant, Min-jun, appeared at his shoulder. "Sir, the auction is starting." Jae-Won didn't move. He was still holding the bracelet. "Find out who she is," he said quietly. Min-jun had worked for Kang for 6 years. He'd never heard his boss ask about a catering girl before. Jae-Won Kang didn't live like other billionaires. No yachts. No parties. No social media. He lived in a glass penthouse that looked down over the whole city, like a watchtower. Every morning, he was at his desk before sunrise. Every meeting, every number, every contract, he controlled it all personally. His staff called him the cold one. Not to his face, of course. They said it in whispers in break rooms, in the elevator on the way home. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was precision. He'd learned young that emotion was a weakness people exploit. His father taught him that. The empire taught him that. By the time he was 35, he had everything and felt nothing. Or so he told himself. He'd had the bracelet analyzed. The child in pediatric ward 4B had been there for 7 weeks. Min-jun placed the folder on the desk without a word. Jae-Won opened it. Inside, a photograph. The catering girl, name listed as Soo-Ah Park. Age 25. No permanent address listed. Former university student, dropped out in her 2nd year. Last 3 employers, a restaurant, a cleaning company, and the catering service from the gala. Her father deceased. Mother unknown. Next of kin listed. 1 person. A younger brother named Dae-ho Park. 7 years old. Currently hospitalized at St. Mary's, Pediatric Ward 4B. Acute leukemia, stage 2. Jae-Won read that line twice. He turned a page. Medical costs unpaid. Warning letters from the hospital. 3 of them. He closed the folder. Turned to his window. The city glittered below. He thought about the way she looked at him in that ballroom. Not afraid. Just tired. The kind of tired that goes deeper than sleep. Min-jun received the instruction at 7 the next morning. He read it 3 times because he thought he'd misread it. He hadn't. Jae-Won's order was simple. Cover the full medical bill for patient Dae-ho Park, Ward 4B. Anonymous. No contact with the family. No paper trail leading back to Kang. Minjun typed the response carefully. Understood. Should I arrange for her reinstatement with the catering company as well? Jae-Won's reply came 30 seconds later.
No. Just that.
Minjun stared at his screen. He thought about the girl in the worn cardigan. He thought about his boss who hadn't slept properly in years. He thought. Something just shifted. He didn't know what. He wasn't sure his boss knew either. Across town, Soo-Ah was at the hospital when a nurse walked in and handed her a bill marked paid in full. Soo-Ah's apartment was one room. Technically, it was the back storage space of a convenience store, but the owner, a kind old woman named Mrs. Choi, let her stay there for almost nothing in exchange for morning shifts. The ceiling was low. The window was small, but she kept it clean. A drawing on the wall above the mattress, Daeho's crayon sketch of the two of them, holding hands. She looked at it every night before she slept. She didn't cry much anymore. Crying was a luxury she'd learned to set aside. Instead, she made lists, job applications, hospital costs, things to sell, things to cut. She was methodical about survival in the same way some people are methodical about success. Because for her, they were the same thing. She still didn't know who had paid the hospital bill. And that terrified her more than the debt ever had. She needed another job. The catering company had fired her after the gala incident, of course. Mrs. Choi's store barely covered the room. So Soo-Ah combed the listings and found one. Housekeeper needed, Kang estate, live-in, full board, competitive wage. She almost laughed. Then she looked at the wage. Then she looked at Daeho's drawing. She applied under a different surname, her mother's maiden name. She wrote no references she couldn't actually provide. She wore her cleanest clothes to the interview. A different manager. A different property. Kang had dozens of estates. She told herself there was no chance he'd ever see her. She told herself a lot of things that week that turned out not to be true. She was hired on the spot. What they didn't tell her. The estate was Jae-Won's private residence. She arrived at 6 a.m., earlier than required. The housekeeper supervisor, a stiff woman named Mrs. Oh, walked her through the rules. No speaking unless spoken to. No entering private rooms. No questions. Stay in designated areas. Soo-Ah nodded at each one. She was good at rules. She'd spent years following other people's. She was polishing the foyer floor on her knees when she heard footsteps behind her.
Slow.
Deliberate. The kind that mean authority. She didn't look up. The footsteps stopped. You, said a voice she recognized in her bones.
Cold.
Sharp. Like a door slamming. Soo-Ah closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she turned around. Jae-Won Kang stared at her. And for the first time in years, his face showed something other than control. He said nothing for a long moment. Just studied her the way you study something you're not sure is real. She met his gaze directly. She decided before coming here that if this ever happened, she wouldn't run. Running was for people who'd done something wrong. You applied under a different name, he said finally. Not a question. She nodded. Yes.
Why?
Because you had me banned, she said simply. From every Kang property. You said it yourself. He looked at her. Something moved behind those dark eyes. She couldn't read it. Then he turned away. Mrs. O, he said to the woman hovering in the doorway. She stays. Mrs. O blinked. Sir, the policy. She stays. Soo-Ah didn't feel relieved. She felt watched. Like something had just begun that she didn't fully understand. He watched her work. Not obviously, he wasn't that kind of man. But she noticed. A presence at a second-floor window when she was in the garden. A pause in the hallway when she was setting the dining table. She wasn't afraid of him exactly. But she was careful.
She was always careful with powerful men.
They tended to want something. By the end of the first week, she'd learned the house's rhythms. He woke at 5. He worked until noon. He never ate breakfast. He drank his coffee black in silence, standing at the kitchen window, looking out at nothing. One morning, she placed the coffee where he usually stood before he arrived. He came in,
Paused.
looked at the mug,
Said nothing. Drank it. Left.
She exhaled slowly. That afternoon, there was a box in her room. A new pair of work shoes. No note. Her old ones had a hole in the sole. He found her in the library on a Thursday evening, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a medical textbook open across her lap. She looked up, startled, ashamed almost, like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. "It's not mine," she said quickly, moving to stand. "I found it on the shelf." "I shouldn't have." "Sit down," he said. She sat. He crossed the room, stood close enough that she had to look up at him. "Why are you reading about leukemia treatments?" The question came out quieter than he'd intended. She looked at the book for a moment, then back up at him. "My brother," she said. Just 2 words. But the way she said them, the weight in that small sentence, made something in Jae-Won's chest pull tight. He walked to the window. His reflection stared back at him. He looked older than he remembered. It was Min-jun who made the mistake. In a weekly briefing, he mentioned the anonymous payment to St. Mary's Hospital, not thinking. Just a routine financial note. One of Jae-Won's cousins, Tae-hyun, was in the room. Tae-hyun, who watched his cousin the way hawks watch rabbits, who'd been jealous of Jae-Won since childhood, who had very sharp ears and very loose lips. By evening, the story had been reshaped, passed through 3 phones and 2 ambitions, into something uglier. Jae-Won was keeping a poor girl in his house, paying her family's debts. She was manipulating him. Classic trap. The family heard it at dinner. His aunt pursed her lips. His uncle set down his chopsticks. "Send her away," his aunt said calmly, "before she becomes a problem." Jae-Won said nothing, which, with him, was never reassuring. The next morning, Jae-Won was different. Not cruel, he was never cruel with that kind of heat. Cold. Precise. He walked past her without acknowledging the coffee. He had Mrs. O reassign her to the outer courtyard, away from the main house. He increased her workload. Soo-Ah noticed the shift immediately. She was perceptive in the way that people who've been poor for a long time become perceptive. You learn to read the temperature of a room, the tension in a voice, the small signs that mean the ground is about to shift. She didn't ask what had changed. She just worked harder, moved more quietly, made herself smaller, and hated herself a little for doing it, because she recognized the motion. It was the same thing she'd always done, in every room where she didn't belong. That night, she visited Dae-ho at the hospital. He asked her, "Do you like where you work?" She didn't answer for a long time. There was a security camera in the hallway outside her room. Jae-Won watched the feed at 2 in the morning, in the way that powerful people sometimes surveillance the things they pretend not to care about. He watched her come back from the hospital at 11 p.m., still in her work clothes. She must have gone straight from her shift. She was carrying a small plastic container of food from the hospital cafeteria, the kind they give patients, not staff. She ate it sitting on the floor of the hallway because she hadn't been assigned a table in the staff quarters. She ate it slowly, methodically, the way people eat when they're hungry but trying to make it last. She didn't look sad. She just looked focused. On what, he didn't know. He closed the feed and called Min-jun. "Give her a room with a table and a proper chair," he said. Then, and raise her salary. He found it by accident, or so he told himself. It had slipped from her apron pocket when she was hanging laundry. He meant to leave it. He picked it up instead. It was a letter. Not sent. Maybe never meant to be sent. It was addressed to her brother. It said, "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But being scared doesn't mean it's over. It just means we're paying attention. I have a job now. A real one. We're going to get through this, Dae-ho. I promise you. I know I promised you that before, and I know things didn't go the way I said. But I am never going to stop. Not for anything. Not for anyone. I love you more than anything in this world that I was given. You are the only thing I was given." He folded it carefully. He placed it back exactly where he'd found it. He went to his study and sat for a very long time without turning on the lights. That night, he made a call. To a specialist. The best leukemia oncologist in the country. She knocked on his study door. That alone was remarkable. None of the staff ever knocked on that door. He said come in with an edge in his voice that meant he expected it to be Min-jun. It was Soo-Ah. She stood straight, hands loose at her sides. "I want to know why you kept me," she said. No preamble. He looked at her. "Your staff. You had me banned, she said. You thought I was a thief. Then you let me work in your home. I want to know why. He leaned back in his chair. The lamp made shadows of his jaw, his cheekbones. He looked like someone who hadn't been asked a direct question in years.
You're bold, he said.
For a housekeeper. I'm not bold, she said quietly. I'm just tired of not knowing where I stand. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and placed a document on the desk. It was the original security report from the gala, with a second page she hadn't seen, a supplementary camera log from a different angle. In the image, time-stamped 2 minutes before the pearl incident, a woman in red was clearly visible placing the necklace in the outer pocket of a catering jacket, her own jacket, and then walking toward where Soo-Ah was standing. A setup.
Planned.
Deliberate. The woman's name was at the bottom of the report, Young Hyunja, wife of his most senior associate. Soo-Ah looked at the image for a long time. You knew, she said. After the fact, he said. Not soon enough. She looked up. His jaw was tight. Not with coldness this time. Something closer to something she had no word for from him. Why are you showing me this? Because, he said, you deserve to know. She sat down, which surprised them both. She hadn't been invited to sit. He didn't say anything about it. Taehyun wasn't finished. He'd noticed the shift in his cousin, the coffee left out, the salary raise, the specialist who'd been called. He was intelligent enough to recognize a threat when he saw one forming. So he did what ambitious, frightened people do. He acted first. He contacted a tabloid, gave them photographs, carefully selected, misleadingly framed, of Jae-Won and Soo-Ah in the house. Positioned the story as Empire heir compromised by scheming lowborn woman. The tabloid ran it at midnight. By morning it was everywhere. The stock dropped 2 points. His aunt called at 7 a.m. His uncle called at 7:02. Jae-Won read the headline once, set his phone down, and called his legal team. Soo-Ah found out about the article through Mrs. O, who read it to her in a tone that meant, you see? You should have known your place. She packed her bag in 30 minutes. She'd done it before, in other rooms, other situations where she'd worn out her welcome or become someone else's problem. She was good at leaving cleanly. No drama. No complaints. She wrote a short note for Mrs. O, thanking her formally for the position. She picked up her bag, walked to the front entrance, opened the door. Jae-Won was standing on the steps. His back was to her. He was on the phone. He heard her.
Turned.
Looked at the bag. His eyes moved to her face. He said something into the phone. Ended the call. Where are you going? She said. I'm making it easier for you. He said. I didn't ask you to do that. She stared at him. He stared at her. The morning air was cold between them. He was not a man who asked things twice. He asked her to come back inside. That was the first time. She hesitated long enough that he walked back through the doorway and left her to decide. She stood there for a full minute, holding her bag, looking at the gate, the road, the city she'd been grinding through for 2 years. Then she looked at her hands, at the worn edges of her sleeves, at the hospital band she still kept in her jacket pocket because she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Daeho was still in treatment. The specialist, whose fees she still didn't know had been covered, was due to assess him next week. She stepped back inside, not because she trusted him, because she trusted, slightly more than before, that she could handle whatever came next. Inside, she found her room had been changed. Larger, with a window overlooking the garden. She didn't ask. It wasn't Jae-Won who told her. It was Min-Jun. He came to find her on a Thursday afternoon with a folder of documents, the hospital bills, the specialist's invoices, all paid in full, all traced back through 3 shell layers to a single origin. He placed the folder on the table in front of her and said nothing. She opened it, went through it page by page. Her face didn't change much. That was the thing about people who've survived real hardship. They've learned not to react to things immediately. They sit with things. She closed the folder, looked out the window. Why? She asked. Not to Min-Jun. To the room. To the situation. To whatever this was. Min-Jun cleared his throat. He saw the bracelet. On the floor of the gala. After they took you out. She was quiet for a very long time. Then, he never said anything. Minjun, he doesn't say things. He just does them. The night she told him everything, she found him at the kitchen window. His usual position. Coffee untouched and gone cold. She stood beside him. Not in front, not at a respectful distance, but beside him.
Equal.
He didn't move. She told him about her parents. About the year she was 15 and her father got sick and the family sold everything, slowly, like a ship offloading weight to stay above water. She told him about Dae-ho being born and their mother leaving and what it felt like to be 17, and suddenly, the only one. She told him about university and how good she was at her studies and why she had to leave. She talked for a long time. He listened the whole way through. Didn't look at her. Just listened. When she finished, he said, "You should have been given better." It was such a strange thing for a man like him to say. She didn't know what to do with it. She looked at his profile in the dark kitchen and thought, "Who took care of you?" he told her. Slowly. The way people tell things they've carried alone for a long time. About his younger sister. She had been sick too. A different illness. Years ago, when he was 22 and just starting to build the empire. He had money, but not the right connections yet, and the hospital was slow, and his father said don't make a fuss, and he listened because he always listened to his father back then. She died on a Tuesday morning while he was in a board meeting. He could have left. He'd been cold since because cold was the only thing that worked. Cold meant he never missed a meeting again. Cold meant he got the connections he needed. Cold meant he built a machine that could actually move when it needed to. But it also meant he'd lost the part of himself that would have gone to his sister's room instead. "I saw your bracelet," he said, "and I thought, not again. I can't let that happen again." She reached out and covered his hand with hers. He didn't pull away. Outside, the city hummed on. Neither of them moved for a long time. Dae-ho went home 3 weeks later. The specialist called it a remarkable response to treatment. He was thin and tired, and he had a gap where he'd lost a tooth, and when Soo-Ah walked into his hospital room, he screamed her name and threw himself at her with all 8 kilograms of his small recovering body. She held him so tight that she shook. She hadn't realized how much of herself she'd been holding together until she could finally let some of it go. Jae-Won was waiting in the hallway. He'd driven them himself, no driver, no assistant. Just him and a car, and the hospital entrance. When she came out with Dae-ho asleep against her shoulder, he looked at the child for a moment. Something crossed his face, not quite a smile. Something older and quieter than a smile. He opened the car door. "Let's go home," he said. She stepped in. And for the first time in a very long time, that word meant something safe. She never did find out who put those shoes in her room that first week. She never needed to ask.